Hello and welcome to this video lecture on Chapter 11. Today we're going to be talking about online reputation management. Some things that you should understand or get a takeaway after going through this lecture and reading the book is you'll understand how you can go out and find information that's about consumer generated media for your product or service. Once you find that information, how do you analyze the information? How do you respond to that information so that it would be the engage and lead conversation? Also, understand why it's important that you get involved in that conversation, that you just don't let it continue to grow and other people add sometimes negative comments, and that becomes even worse for your company. You should also understand that your strategy should be continually evolving, and that how you can recover from those online threats when they do occur. So one of the first things you need to understand is that even though you've set up certain channels for your customers to use and give you feedback and provide information to other customers, they may not be using those channels in order to talk about your product or service. So it may be you have a Facebook account, you have a Twitter account, but all of a sudden there's some other kind of social media that's out there, such as Instagram or some kind of video or some kind of Snapchat, and they're using that. So you need to have a way of looking at all different kinds of communication channels, and today they're probably all in the area of social media, and use those and find out what your customers have to say about your product or service. Now, the nice thing is that those social media applications all require some form of internet, and so you can use the internet to find that information. So there's a set of steps that you can take in order to find out what the conversation is. The first step is to monitor that conversation. And so online reputation management, or ORM, allows you to track different mentions of your product, allows you to track your staff, your products, your industry, and also your competitors. So when you're doing the searches, you don't want to just do a search for a certain product. You want to do a search for all of these things. Maybe you've got an employee that's talking bad about your company, and you'll need to take actions in order to stop those threats. So you would find that out about staff. Now, if you're in the healthcare industry and they're violating HIPAA violations, you can fire them. And so you've always got to be vigilant to be monitoring in that industry constantly to make sure nothing is getting out that could put you at, in a lawsuit of some type. So the things to look for when you're doing that internet search is look for your brand name, look for any links that you've used, people that might have used them, your URLs. It stands for Uniform Resource Locator. It's actually the address you type into a browser. Any kind of key products that you have. And then lastly, your personnel. Maybe you need to search by specific names, specific titles, or your company name. That'll get you all that information that you might be looking for. In terms of looking for information in your industry, you might have certain conferences that are coming up. Look for patents that are in your industry, any news that's in there. So if you're looking for healthcare, you might want to look at any specific healthcare conferences. This might be for specific types of jobs in that area. So it might be, is it for physicians? Is it for doctors? Is it for radiologists? You need to be as specific as you can to see what's going on, to monitor that conversation of what people might be saying. Then in terms of what your competitors are doing, you might look at what are their brand names and search for that information. Um, are they coming up with new product launches? So if it might be a food category, and so if they're coming up with new product launches in their food category. And now you see this sometimes with, say, in the chips, if you got Fritos and Frito-Lays or Lay's potato chips, they would be advertising the new launches or some kind of crowdsourcing that they're doing, and that would be an indication that they're going to have a new product launch in the future. You might want to also track their websites, see what kind of updates they're doing, and then if you can get to it, look for job vacancies. A lot of times you can go into their corporate website and look for job vacancies, and that would tell you, certain key personnel are leaving or have been promoted, which leaves that slot open, and that would also give you some more information to analyze about what's going on in your industry and what's going on with your competitors. Some other areas that you might want to look at in terms of what needs to be tracked is all your social media feeds, any social media feeds that you aren't using or haven't specified to use, but your customers, your competitors might be saying things on those other social media feeds. So along with that, you would look at blogs. Twitter would be one of those social media feeds. Any kind of news releases that are coming out, forums. There could be boards where people can go and post comments. Any kind of photos that the people are putting out, especially if they're negative uses of your product or service. And so you want to monitor all of that. I would also consider YouTube to be a social media outlet, so you might want to look at videos. You might want to look at any kind of job search engines, different events again, website changes, and so on. I just want to mention at this point, we've talked about a lot of different areas that you could be searching for the conversation. Do companies do this? The bigger companies that have the resources do. If you're a small company, you probably don't. And so you probably need to have some sort of plan on how to go out there and check these different areas periodically. It's not like you can check these weekly or daily if you don't have the resources. And so a larger company would be having enough resources to hire someone to do this sort of activity full time. And if you don't, you've got to figure out a way in order to incorporate that into somebody's job, or you're going to have to do it, and figure out what's going to give you the most feedback for the smallest amount of time that you could put into doing this. The next step that you want to do to get some information and help you with your online reputation management is to measure what's being said and by who. So one thing you need to look at is your own websites and your own domains that are owned by your company. And so, if you're Western Kentucky University, do you just look at the WKU site? Probably not. I mean, there are some commercial sites, WKU Sports. There's the WKU Herald, which is the student newspaper. You would need to monitor all those sites to get a feel for what's being said. You also want to look at what kind of blogs are being maintained by employees. Here at Western, there are different listservs for people to send out emails and have a conversation about different topics. So somebody needs to be monitoring those to see what the employees are saying. And then if you can, you want to look at any kind of blogs that are maintained by former employees. In the past, there have been incidences where you have an employee who's left the company and they're sort of disgruntled, and they will start up their own blogs to talk bad about their former employer. But you've got to know what they're saying so you can deal with that. So in the end, you're going to run an audit on these different areas to see exactly what people are saying about you. So once you run that audit, you've got to then determine what is the sentiment. That is it, highly positive or highly negative or somewhere in the middle? And so, as you see by this first bulleted item here, that sentiment varies by, what they've posted. You're going to have to figure out a way to determine what that sentiment is. One way is to use some analytical tools that look at text and can give you a sentiment, say, index of how positive or negative that written text is. If it's a video, you might have to have someone transcribe the words or fill out some kind of form detailing what the video is showing. So then you can analyze that for the sentiment. So what you've got to do is then determine how you're going to respond to each category of sentiment, whether it's highly positive, highly negative, or neutral. If you're not getting anybody posting, then as your book states, chances are then nobody really cares about your product or service, and you might not continue on because nobody cares about that. If it's highly negative, then you need to respond and make sure people who can fix the problems are notified and that they start to fix the problems. You just don't want to give a negative comment some kind of a response back so you satisfied that, but then nothing is actually done. Eventually that will destroy your company as well. If you're looking at different sites on the internet, especially through a web browser, you may want to look and see how much traffic that site is generating. What I mean by traffic is how many people are coming to that site. And so if it's your own site, you can probably have a Google Analytics code set up on your site, and you can determine how many people are visiting a certain page, how many people are making certain requests. You can see what they're searching for when they're on your site. You can see what links they're going to, what pages they're not going to, and you can actually track a pattern of how they're moving through your website. So that all give you some information and ways of assessing what their sentiment is on your page. If they come in, type something, and they're looking for something and can't find it and leave immediately, that means you're probably going to have a high bounce rate on certain pages, which means that's not good. You didn't get them to stay and find what they were looking for. So again, you're establishing or trying to figure out what that sentiment is for your media that you're using to communicate or that your customers are communicating on. So if you're looking at blogs or say consumer ratings, one thing would be to look at, how many people had a positive impact, how many people had a negative impact. If it's specifically a blog, you can look and see what's the size of that audience. Do they really have a large audience where a lot of people are reading what that person is writing about? How often do they post? If they don't post very often, they're going to have less of an influence. But if they're posting very often, they'll probably have more of an influence, especially the larger the audience is. And then also look at the time and date of the blog, especially the date in terms of how old is this blog? Is this something that happened several months ago that wasn't dealt with? You can still deal with it, and you probably still should, but it may not be the most current problems or representing the current sentiment of your product or service or your company that you're doing this research on. What I've listed on the screen now is some output from a company that actually monitors um, what is being said about your organization. And so this is a paid forward service. And so an example of what they might be tracking is looking at certain sites. They'll give you a rating of the sentiment, the source, the credibility, and then the action that should be taken. And so your book lists a company called Brand's Eye that actually does this, and I've actually pulled that up on the screen. So if you want to go there, you can actually see more things that they actually do. And so they're going to give you lots of charts. Here's a word graph showing you whatever they searched on, what was the most popular search, and then subsets of those shirts and so searches. And so if you look here, it looks like it's rugby, super, stormers, and so on. But they'll give you some other information so you can actually pay somebody to go out and do that analysis for you and then look at the reports. And so as you can see from this slide, it looks at some human subjectivity and combines that with some different technology so that you get some kind of quantifiable output and something you can do then to follow up on, or whether you need to follow up on, and who to contact. For a small company, you may not have the resources to pay for this, but if you're a large company, you probably want somebody monitoring everything they can, especially about your brand. So if you're like Coca-Cola, do you want to have somebody looking all the time for each one of your brands that you have? Not only the Coke drink, but all the other types of drinks and products that you are selling. The next step that you want to do with your online reputation management plan is to engage and lead the conversation. As your book mentions, one way to show that you're listening and paying attention to what your customers are saying is to engage and reply back and be part of that conversation. So some suggested ways of doing that and how to respond is when the comments are positive, you'll probably want to acknowledge those. If they're neutral, like I mentioned earlier, you may be in danger of being forgotten. And then if it's a negative comment, you probably need to respond to it. Be polite and tell your customer that you're trying to fix the problem, or you'll, sometimes you might even want to say, send me an email or give me a way I can contact you, and then follow up and make sure you contact that customer and then talk to them outside of the media that they're using and see if you can resolve their problem. Maybe you want them to send back your product and fix it for them, and then hopefully that will result in some positive comments. The last step is to think about how this information can evolve your strategy. So this online reputation management can be helpful in other areas of your business. And so you're grabbing that information. If you pass it on to the marketing people, that may give them better insights into how their marketing plan is working, if they need to change things, and so on. You might also give it to your manufacturing side. Maybe customers are saying, boy, this product is great, but if it only had this feature, it would make it so much better. And so then you could use the manufacturing side to see if they can provide that feature, and that might increase your positive comments, also increase sales, and so it's helping the organization overall. And when that happens, those insights then can help the business come up with a better strategy in every department, and then a better overall strategy. The last thing in the chapter talks about different rules to recover from an online brand attack. One is to have some humility. You're probably never, ever going to be too big that somebody can't attack your brand online. It's just going to happen, and you're going to need to be prepared for it. Listen to what your customers are saying and be mindful that, if it's a bad attack, that you need to respond to it in some way and to keep your reputation on the positive side. You also need to act immediately, especially if it's a negative response. Even if it's a positive response, you want to act immediately, and that may garner some more positive responses. If people are posting things and you're not responding right away, it sends the message that you don't care. And if you don't care, then your customers may forget about your company in the future. The next item is, what if whatever the person's saying about your company is untrue? Then you should probably reach out to them, contact them, and ask them to remove or retract what they're saying. But first, you've got to prove to them that what they're saying is false. The next thing that might happen is what they're saying is true, but it's a negative story. And so how to respond to that is that you want to try and tell your side of the story and put it into a positive light. And that's not to say you want to spin it and try and make little untruths about that. Just tell the truth, be honest with your customers, and tell them why this happened and how you're trying to resolve the problem. Another thing you can do is to keep your negative pages out of the search engine. And so you can add more pages or more space after that negative comment so that it doesn't come up at the first part of the search engine result. And while you still need to address the problems, but you want to make sure that positive image is being portrayed by those comments on your site. The next step is you always want to maintain communication. Maybe you want to look at the different types of social media that your customers are using, and then start that conversation on those different types of applications. But you always want to try and engage in those conversations. The question is how often should you engage in those conversations so that your customers know that you're listening, that you want to be part of that conversation. So you're going to have to gauge that. Sometimes they want immediate feedback and they want people in there every day. Then you have to figure out what parts of the day that you want to be in there. When are your consumers actually in that app, actually reading those comments? That's when you need to be engaged as well. And so what you're actually trying to do is show your customers that you actually care. And so, they've given you their time, they've bought your product or service, and so they want to know that you care, that you're listening. And so, to sum all this up, you need to be prepared for a negative attack on your company, your brand, your product or service, and then have a plan in place on how you're going to respond to that. Hopefully, that's what we've done with this chapter, is given you some different ideas on how to think about your online reputation management, how you're going to deal with that, how you're going to respond to that, and hopefully use that information that you're gathering in order to develop an overall strategy for your company so that you can be successful. And that ends this chapter on online reputation management.